guys, welcome back to another Whiskey Diaries. We are here at the smallest warehouse in the world in Glenfarclas. This baby here currently only holds 4 barrels and is registered as the smallest warehouse in the world. As you can obviously guess, we're here at Glenfarclas and we just did the 5 decades tour that we booked through the distillery, and I gotta tell you, this was unbelievable. Such a good tour, so informative. Steve, the gentleman who ran us through the whole distillery, wealth of knowledge. You cannot get enough information, and literally every single question that we asked he answered. So much so that during the video I'm gonna have to check on my notes because it was so much information, it was overwhelming. So just to start with a little bit of the history of Glenfarclas. Obviously you can find out a lot of stuff doing Google, but the interesting parts here that we got told firsthand was obviously this is a family business. This is the 5th generation that is currently, the last one is John, started by John Grant officially in 1836. Now, before they started the distillery, this used to be a cattle farm, actually a pretty famous and very profitable cattle farm. Initially, John Grant bought it as a cattle farm, and because of the state laws at the time, the state owned the whole land. The distillery was built during illegal distilling times and all that stuff, so they decided to keep the distillery, but you couldn't just buy it or you couldn't just get rid of it. So John at the time put his son George to look after the distillery. Eventually George he found a distiller. The distillery 5 years later moved out, and eventually George decided just to take on the distillery and then pass it on to his later sons. John Grant, the guy who bought the land, bought this land for £511, which is ridiculous because this property right now, with the current stock that they got, is valued at £250 million, which is a pretty decent investment. Now, pass it on through the generations. So we got George that took over the distillery, started distilling himself, then the second George, then the third George, then the final George is George the 4th, let's call it the 4th. He passed away in 2002, but during the 1940s, while he was running the distillery, he was the guy who decided that back in the day, most whiskies, as we know, were being made to just make a blend, like Johnny Walker, Chivas, and so on and so on. George was the guy who decided that Glenfarclas should be starting to be making as a single malt. So in the 1940s, he went to Spain and he struck a deal with one of the bodegas in Spain just to start getting Oloroso sherry casks. Since then, that's basically all they use. 99% of all the casks, of all the bottles, actually come from Oloroso sherry from this bodega in particular. Now, the final interesting part that is John, he's the last member of the family who took basically the last son. John got offered not long ago about 500 mil to buy the distillery. This is an important aspect because this is it's kind of like makes you warm inside to think that one of these distilleries that is so big is still only 100% family owned, and other distilleries and other companies have offered a stupid amount of money to buy them, and they still decided to keep it on the family. So that's what's really interesting for me. Now, a little bit more specifics on where the whiskey comes from and how it is made and all that stuff, we'll go straight right into it. So the water comes from Benrinnes Mountain, that is to my left here. It's a big mountain over there. And what is interesting about this is that when it rains, obviously the water gets absorbed by the ground and then transformed into a creek. Now in the mountains, we got a lot of heather and a lot of peat that is underground. After the water goes deep underground and gets transformed and filtered through the peat, it actually hits granite, and granite is zero porous. So the only way that it goes through the granite is through cracks in the ground. Now, once that water comes through, these guys, there's a little creek over here, and you can see it here. Over here, there's a little mill that shows you the water flowing to the distillery, which is really cute. And basically what Steve was saying is that the water here is actually highly acidic, at the top of 5 pH. So that water is not that great to be drunk, but it's great for distilling. The other thing that it is a very soft water because it didn't go through like soft rock. It went actually through hard rock. So it didn't absorb any minerals or anything like that. So it's just basically high acidic, soft water that is great for distilling. Now, obviously, as you know, you need three things to make whiskey. You need the malt, you need the water, and then you need the yeast. The interesting part about the yeast is that it's a secret yeast. It's a blend between brewer's yeast and distiller's yeast. The brewer's yeast usually is done by beer makers and all that stuff, and what it does, it just creates a high flavor a brew mix, so like an alcoholic beverage. The distiller's yeast, on the other hand, produces something that is high on alcohol. These guys decide to mix them both. They don't tell you what ratio or what it is. They only know that they get it in a chemist. It's custom made for them, and they call it the Glenfarclas yeast. And basically that's what they use. Basically produce a wort that is about 9% ABV. Now, the grain that they get is something that is called Lorette strain. Before that, they used to use something that is Concerto, and before that, they used to use the Golden Promise. As everybody knows whiskey, Golden Promise used to be an exceptional grain that used to be used in the early 90s and 2000s, and then they started phasing it because it started getting basically mixed with other grains and a little bit more complex on that. So the Lorette strain actually holds yields about 63%. Of starch, which then gets produced to sugar. Then they have a local, the mill is on site. They recently changed the mill to a brand new one that comes from Denmark, I believe, Sweden, sorry. And it can actually mill up to 8 tons a day of grain. The ratio of the husks to grist to flour that they use in here depends. Each distillery has its own recipe and depends on the tanks. The shorter the tanks, the less flour you want to use. The bigger the tanks, the more flour you want to use. That's sort of a rough explanation. But basically, in this case, they use 21% husk, 75% grist, and 5% flour. They mix it all up and they basically put it with hot water. In this case, they do 3 runs of water. The first 2 is where they get all the sugar liquid. The first run is at 78 degrees. The second run is at 85. Sorry, the third run is 85 degrees. Now, once they take all the water out of the first run, so that's all sugary water, the third run gets actually put aside and it gets added to the next batch of flour. That means that basically they're reusing everything they can just to minimize wastage as much as they can. Now the washbacks and the fermentation tanks and all that stuff, basically they have one mash tun that is 10 meters and 16.5 tons. Then after that, once all of that is done, the wort gets transferred to 12 washbacks. Each is basically 500,000 liters in total, and there are 12 of them. Each one of them is about 40,000 liters. Now, this is incredible because one of the things that is important about this is compared to other distilleries that is about 74 to 80 hours fermentation. These guys, they do it for 104 hours of fermentation. It's one of the longest ones I've heard. And what that does in fermentation was creates a more fruity, a lot more flavor on the wort itself. Basically, by the time it finishes, as I said before, it's 9%. Now, after that, like normal distillation, all this gets transferred to the wash stills, then gets transferred to the spirit stills, and then basically you get your new make. A couple of interesting facts is they have 6 stills, 3 wash and 3 spirit stills. The wash stills is 26,500 liters. The spirit stills is 21.2 thousand liters, and the low wines that comes out of the first wash still comes out at 24%. Now here comes the interesting part. So the heads, basically the heart that they use out of the whole distillation, sorry, not out of the whole distillation process, but out of the spirit still is 15%, 15 to 20%. That's very, very low. I learned, like we talked about other distilleries like Ardou, for instance, that they use 40%. So obviously they're trying to make the new make as pure and as better as possible as they can. Now, the other thing that this is pretty common in other distilleries as well is that the faints and the heads, the faints gets added to the initial wash still, so everything gets reused as well. Whatever the leftovers of the the fermentation and all the grains, leftover grains and all the stuff gets actually packed and sent for cattle feed like many other distilleries. Now, the distillery is stunning. We have a drone. We got lucky enough that they allow us to do a drone video of the whole site. Beautiful green, there's deers running around. The drive here was spectacular, and then we got lucky enough that because of the 5 decades tasting, we got to taste 5 decades of Glenfarclas, going all the way back to 1964. We're going to go one by one on which whiskey we tried, because if you ever come to Scotland, you should definitely do this tour. It's absolutely stunning. The staff are so friendly and so hospitable. Steve did an amazing job. So he was entertaining, he was fun, full of information, didn't care about answering any sort of questions. It was actually awesome. So then after this, after we walk through the distillery, they take you to the warehouse just to look at the barrels and have a chat about what barrels they got. As I said, 99% of all the barrels are Oloroso sherry from Spain. At one stage he did mention that in the 80s and in the 90s a lot of the bodega that they were getting the sherry, instead of using European oak, they started using American oak. So from the 80s and the 90s the whiskey might have a little bit different taste compared to Oloroso sherry, but besides that it's 99% European oak and they get guaranteed of that. Nowadays 1 cask of Oloroso sherry goes at £1,100 per cask. That's with no liquid inside, so it's crazy. Anyway, so what we did is they took us to the Glenfarclas main room, to the visitor's house, and they have a room that it was made out of the remains of the Empress of Australia. It was a ship that basically they dismantle it, and all the oak and everything from inside the boat, they just refurbish it and they did a whole room made out of oak. It's absolutely stunning and really fitting for the whiskies that we tried. So what we tried was the 2003 Family Casks. That is an 18-year-old that is 58% ABV, and it was a first fill sherry cask. It was quite light, really strong, lots of pear, lots of notes of spiciness, but to be honest, it wasn't one of my favorites. Then we tried the 1990 Family Cask, 31 years old. This was bottled at 51.9% first fill sherry casks. Then we tried the 1981 bottled at 2017, that was 36 years old, 54%. Then we tried the 1974 bottled in 2015, that it was a 41-year-old, that it was 50%, the fourth fill. And finally, we tried the 1964 bottle in 2017, at 53 years old, that was 42% ABV, and it was a first fill sherry cask. That last bottle alone is £6,000, and I tell you, it was phenomenal. So all these whiskies, I'm assuming that every year or every time they run out of the bottle, it changes and you get to try new ones, but I'm telling you, is an incredible experience. So now that we've done through the whole distillery, we're going to do what we usually do. In this case, we bought a bottle of Glenfarclas Family Reserve, Family Cask, sorry. This one is from 1987, and we haven't opened it. This comes from the distillery. Once you buy one of these bottles as well, they give you a lovely book that is only distillery only. We got one as well because it's actually really cool, and it tells you heaps of stuff about the distillery, and is a great, really heavy, really good looking book. Anyway, so the 1987, this was distilled in 1987 and bottled in winter of 2018. 46% ABV. One of 588 bottles, and this is cask number 3831, and it's refill sherry barrel. So you can see by the color that it's a full sherry bomb. Now we're just gonna open it. Again, I cannot stress enough the amount of knowledge that these guys, and this video we have to shorten a few things and a few details, because it's just the tour was 2.5 hours long, and you could easily do 4 hours if you wanted to. He just would not, just amount of knowledge that he had, it was incredible. All right, Never tried it. There's no tasting notes, and one of the things that I like about the Family Cask is that they leave a white label at the back, so you can actually write your own tasting notes, which I think that is really cute, because you only can drink this bottle once. You'll never be able to repeat it. So anyway, wow, okay. That's incredible. You get obviously the notes of sherry and the spices and everything that you get, but there's a certain sweetness to the notes as well that are actually really, really, really interesting. That is incredible, especially to be drinking it at this temperature. Yeah, I cannot. You get all the usually spicy notes that you get from cloves, cinnamon. Then you got the raisins and the dry fruits. There's a little bit of apricot at that. Poached apples. Yeah, it's a really, really, really good whiskey. This one we bought it at the distillery, but I'm pretty sure you can buy it online as well. So anyway, guys, I hope you like this. This is an incredible distillery, and we really, really recommend it. The amount of knowledge, as I said, and the detail and the amount of time that they spend with all of you is actually incredible. Anyway, guys, we'll see you in the next one. Salam Jabbar, and we'll see you next time.